There are moments in a man's life when he is called to do something not out of weakness, but out of strengths, something not because he wants to, but because he knows he must. And that moment is when he lets go. Not because he no longer loves her, but because he loves her enough to set her free. You see, love does not imprison. Love does not shackle the soul. Love does not demand, and it does not beg. Real love stands at the door and waits not with pride, but with peace. And when you let her go, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in the quiet pain of surrender, something sacred happens. You release not just her, but your need to control the outcome. And that's where the miracle begins. She didn't fall in love with you while you were trying to prove something. She didn't fall in love when you chased her, cornered her, or tried to convince her. She didn't fall in love with the noise or the striving. She fell in love when the echoes of your absence began to fill her heart with memories she could no longer silence. She fell in love when she realized that everything you were was everything she needed. But she couldn't see it until you were gone. When you stepped away, not with arrogance, but with humility, you gave her the space to remember, to reflect, to regret, and to return. And if she did come back, she came not because she was lonely, but because she had awakened. Awakened to the depth of who you were. Awakened to the man she once looked at, but never really saw. There is a divine principle at work here. Sometimes we have to lose what we love to understand why we loved it. Sometimes the heart must be emptied before it can be filled again. And yes, it hurts. Yes, it breaks you. But in that breaking, something holy is born, something stronger, something real. You didn't let her go because you were done, you let her go because you believed in a love that is not chained by need but released in faith. And it was in that release that she remembered who you were. It was in that distance that she saw what closeness had blinded her to. And when she came back, if she did, she didn't just come back to a man. She came back to the truth. To the realization that love, true love, is not always loud. Sometimes it is silent. Sometimes it walks away not to abandon, but to awaken. So if you're listening today and you're wondering if letting go is a mistake, hear this. Sometimes your absence is the only sermon her heart can hear. Sometimes your silence speaks louder than your presence. And sometimes letting go is the only way love learns how to come home. Love isn't always born in presence. It sometimes grows stronger in absence. This is a truth many of us only learn through pain. We imagine that love thrives in touch, in words, in shared spaces, and constant closeness. We hold tightly, believing that as long as we are near, we can keep love alive. But often, it is not our presence that awakens someone to the truth of what we mean to them, it is our absence. When we are no longer there to call, to comfort, to stand beside them in the quiet hours of the night, that is when the heart begins to realize what it had and what it may have lost. You might have poured your soul into her. You gave your best. And maybe it went unnoticed, maybe it was taken for granted, or perhaps it was simply not received in the way you hoped. And in that moment of realization, when everything you gave still wasn't enough to make her stay, you were faced with the hardest decision a man can make, not to fight harder, but to let her go. Not because you stopped loving her, but because you loved her enough to give her the freedom to choose. In that quiet, sacred act of release, you reveal the depth of your character and the strength of your love. Because love that clings out of fear is not love, it is desperation. But love that steps back, that trusts in what was planted, that lets the silence do what your words could not, that is love refined. She didn't fall in love with you in the noise. She didn't fall in love with you when you were pleading, when you were reaching, when you were trying to show her what she had. No, she fell in love when you stopped speaking, when you stopped showing up, and when she was left alone with her thoughts, her memories, and her aching heart. She fell in love when she saw the outline of your absence filling the room, when the echo of your laughter haunted her silence. when your quiet strength began to shout louder than your presence ever could. Sometimes it takes losing you to see you. Sometimes only distance can magnify what proximity distorted. And while the world tells us to fight and never give up, there is something far more powerful in letting go, not to walk away in bitterness, but to step back in faith, believing that what is real will remain and what is meant will find its way. That absence isn't always the end. It can be the rebirth of love, the slow and sacred return of something that had to be lost before it could be truly found. When you let her go, you unknowingly invited her to see the truth in a way she never could when you were standing right in front of her. And it was in that moment, that deep soul-stirring realization, that she began to fall in love, not with a new version of you, but with the you she never fully recognized before. True love is refined in the fire of separation. It is easy to say you love someone when they are standing next to you, when their hand is in yours, when their voice is a familiar comfort in your everyday life. But it is in the space between hearts, when that voice is no longer heard and that presence no longer felt, that love is tested and revealed for what it really is. There's something profound about silence. It makes us hear the things we ignored, feel the things we buried, and remember the things we dismissed. When two people are apart, something either dies or something is born. And if love was only surface deep, if it was built on convenience or proximity, then distance will dissolve it. But if love was real, if it had roots, then separation is not destruction, it is refinement. It is a fire that burns away pride, ego, and the distractions of life. And what's left is something raw, something pure, something unshakable. When you let her go, you stepped away from comfort and into the unknown. You stopped fighting for her to stay, not because you didn't care, but because you finally understood that love cannot be forced. You chose the harder path, the quieter one, the path of surrender. And what you may not have seen at the time is that this separation wasn't just shaping you, it was shaping her. It was drawing something out of her that could not surface while you were close. When she didn't have to think about you, she didn't. When you were always there, she never had to wonder. But when you were gone, her heart began to sift through the memories, the moments, the kindness, the love. And she realized, not all at once, but slowly, like the morning light creeping over a cold horizon, that what she had with you was not ordinary. That your love wasn't perfect, but it was steady. It was safe. It was real. And that kind of love doesn't fade in the dark. It glows brighter. It becomes clearer. The fire of separation doesn't destroy real love, it makes it undeniable. It breaks away the shallow, the selfish, the temporary, and leaves only what was meant to remain. That is why, so often, love that is born again after absence feels more sacred, more serious, more surrendered, because it has been through the fire. It has been tested in silence. It has survived when there was no effort, no chasing, no pleading. It grew in the quiet soil of realization, watered by the tears of regret, and warmed by the longing that absence brings. So if she fell in love with you after you let her go, it wasn't by accident. It was because the fire you both walked through burned away everything but the truth. And in that truth, she saw you not as the man trying to win her, but as the man she had already lost once and never wanted to lose again. You never know what your presence truly meant until your absence begins to echo in her soul. When you were there, it was easy for her to look past the little things you did, to overlook the depth of your commitment, to take for granted the security that came from your consistent presence. That is the nature of the human heart. It often fails to see value until value is removed. When you were near, your love was constant, your words familiar, your support unshaken. But because you were always available, she never had to pause and consider what her life would feel like without you in it. And so she didn't. But when you finally stepped back, when your voice no longer echoed through her days, and your laughter no longer danced through her hours, that's when the echo began. A quiet, haunting echo that fills the places your presence once held. Your name still whispered by her memories, your silence louder than any conversation, your kindness suddenly remembered like a song that once played in the background and is now missed like breath itself. That echo isn't just nostalgia, it's awakening. It's her spirit waking up to the fact that what she had was not ordinary. It was sacred. It was the kind of presence that doesn't just sit next to you, it wraps around you. It was the kind of presence that steadied her without her noticing. And when it was gone, the absence created a void too loud to ignore. She didn't fall in love with you when you were there all the time. She fell in love with you when she finally understood what your presence carried. That echo of you began to follow her through places you used to go, in the songs you once played, in the quiet moments when her mind tried to move on but her heart refused to forget. The very things she used to shrug off, your patience, your sacrifice, your gentleness, now weigh heavily on her soul. In your absence, your presence became larger. You became more visible, more vivid. That's the mystery of love and the pain of letting go. It often takes losing something to understand its worth. And while your heart might have broken when you walked away, know this: sometimes that absence you left behind is the only voice strong enough to reach her soul. Not your messages, not your attempts, but your silence. It was your silence that made the noise of her own heart unbearable. And in that noise, in the overwhelming echo of all you were to her, she began to fall not for the idea of you, but for the real you, the one who showed up again and again, the one who quietly built a love she only now realizes she wasn't ready to receive. Letting her go was not a mistake. It was the moment she finally saw what you meant. There comes a point in every man's life where he is faced with the painful realization that holding on too tightly may be the very reason something slips through his fingers. You loved her. You showed up. You did all that you knew to do. And still, she seemed distant, unsure, maybe even uninterested. And in that place of confusion and exhaustion, you made a choice that wasn't weak but wise. You stepped back. You gave her the space to find what she truly wanted, not because you stopped caring, but because you cared enough to stop forcing. It wasn't a dramatic exit. It wasn't meant to punish or manipulate. It was a quiet departure, a letting go, not rooted in pride, but in peace. And that was the turning point. Because the moment you stopped trying to prove your worth, she had no choice but to measure it for herself. While you were near, your love was too familiar, too accessible. And the truth is, sometimes people don't recognize how rare something is until it's no longer right in front of them. When you released her, you didn't just let her walk away, you allowed her to see. You gave her the rare opportunity to reflect without pressure, to revisit the memories without your presence clouding her emotions, to feel the weight of your absence where once your comfort used to stand. And in that quiet distance, something began to shift. She didn't see you as the man who always waited. She saw you as the man who could have stayed, but didn't beg. She saw your love not as a convenience, but as a gift. And gifts, once lost, are no longer ignored. Her heart began to remember the strength of your patience, the way you listened when she spoke without knowing what she was really saying, the little things you did without asking for recognition, and the quiet way you loved her even when she didn't love you back with the same depth. Letting her go was not the end of your story, it was the beginning of hers. The beginning of her truly understanding what you meant, who you were, and what it felt like to not have you around. In the days that followed your absence, she began to see you through new eyes. Not the eyes of expectation, but the eyes of realization. And through those eyes, she fell not for the man she thought she knew, but for the man who had always been there, loving her in silence, praying for her peace, and choosing her again and again without asking for anything in return. The power of unconditional love shows its strength only when it is not forced. We often confuse love with control, with presence, with doing more, saying more, being more. But real love, deep love, the kind that reflects patience, sacrifice, and faith, does not demand. It does not chase in desperation. It does not panic in the face of distance. Instead, it waits, it trusts, and it lets go when necessary. Because unconditional love is not about proving yourself over and over again. It is not about fighting battles just to stay noticed. It's about giving someone the space to choose you willingly, not out of guilt or pressure, but from a place of clarity and conviction. You loved her, and you showed her. You offered her your heart, your loyalty, and your best intentions. But when she pulled away, when she needed space, when she couldn't give you the love you were hoping to receive, you did something most men would not. You stepped back. Not because you stopped loving her, but because you finally understood that real love holds open hands, not clenched fists. You didn't leave in anger. You didn't walk away with harsh words. You withdrew with grace. That is the kind of love that speaks even in silence. That is the kind of love that echoes even after the goodbye. When you loved her without needing her to love you back on your timeline, you showed her a kind of strength that doesn't boast, a kind of power that doesn't control. You gave her something rare, a man who didn't need to be chosen to know his worth. And that silence, that surrender, that stillness, it reached her deeper than any speech, text, or second chance ever could. She might not have noticed it at first. She might have mistaken your distance for disinterest. But over time, in the quiet, she began to feel the difference between a man who gives up and a man who lets go. She began to realize that you weren't absent because you didn't care. You were absent because you cared too much to keep forcing something that wasn't ready. You were loving her without holding her hostage. You gave her the space to miss you, to remember you, to reflect on what you were not because you reminded her, but because she finally had nothing left to distract her from the truth. Love like that doesn't scream or plead. It doesn't need to be loud. It is still. It is faithful. It is strong enough to walk away with a prayer rather than a promise. And in that kind of love, there is no bitterness. Just the quiet power of a man who knows that if she ever came back, it wouldn't be because he tried harder. It would be because she finally saw the kind of love that doesn't chain her, but frees her to choose him all over again. Some stories don't end when someone walks away, they begin. There is a kind of goodbye that doesn't close the book but opens a new chapter, one that neither of you saw coming. Sometimes the most meaningful part of a love story happens after the separation, after the silence, after the distance creates a space wide enough for reflection to take root. When she left, or when you let her go, it may have felt like a full stop, a conclusion you didn't want, a heartbreak you weren't prepared for. But in reality, it was the start of something deeper. Because love, when it's genuine, doesn't simply vanish in absence. It often wakes up. It matures. It grows not in the safety of daily comfort, but in the longing, the missing, the remembering. It begins not in the closeness of a kiss, but in the echo of footsteps walking away, and the emptiness that those steps leave behind. And that emptiness doesn't always stay hollow. Sometimes it becomes the very ground where love is reborn. She may have walked away thinking she knew what she wanted. She may have believed there was something better waiting for her. Or maybe she simply wasn't ready to receive the love you had been giving. But what she didn't expect was the way your absence would speak. Not in words, but in weight. Not in noise, but in clarity. As time passed, she didn't just remember you, she began to see you differently. She started seeing the kind of man you were beneath the distractions, beyond the moment she once misunderstood. She remembered how you loved her quietly, consistently, even when it wasn't returned the way you hoped. And that love, the one that didn't cling or beg, began to rise in her memory like a dawn she hadn't noticed while it was shining. She started to feel what she hadn't allowed herself to feel before, not because you were gone, but because the distance gave her permission to see without pride, to feel without pressure, to realize without resistance. What began as an ending became the beginning of understanding. The man she once saw as ordinary became extraordinary in his silence, in his absence, in his willingness to walk away with love instead of anger. That kind of love leaves a mark that time can't erase. That kind of love is not easily replaced. And in the stillness that followed your departure, she wasn't just missing you, she was falling in love with the version of you she hadn't noticed before. The version that didn't need to convince her, the version that loved her enough to let her go. Some stories are only fully written after the pages are torn. And if she came back, if her heart turned around, it wasn't because you pushed, it was because you allowed the story to unfold on its own. And in that unfolding, she discovered that what felt like the end was only where real love was just beginning to rise. And so, if you've loved deeply and still found yourself alone, if you let her go not because you wanted to lose her, but because you refused to hold her hostage, then take heart, because sometimes love must pass through the valley of silence before it can return with truth. Sometimes a man must walk away not in anger, not in defeat, but in quiet faith, believing that what was real will survive the distance, and what was meant will not stay lost forever. She didn't fall in love with the man who chased her. She fell in love with the man who let her go. The man who stood strong in silence. The man whose absence spoke louder than any words ever could. And if her heart turned back to you, it was not out of pity or loneliness. It was because the love you gave in surrender became the mirror through which she finally saw what you truly meant. In the end, letting her go wasn't the end of the story, it was the part where your love became undeniable. Because love, when it's patient, when it's faithful, when it trusts God and time more than pressure and pride, never returns empty. It returns deeper. It returns clearer. It returns stronger. And when it does, it's no longer love that had to be earned. It's love that has finally been understood.